Well, hey, folks. I am really excited to tell you that I've just finished recording my first ever podcast episode. Woo! Yeah. And it was with my dear friend and um, gosh, I don't even know how to describe Jeff. Jeff Vander Clute's my first guest. I'll drop a link to his website on the show notes. We discussed his um, map of organizations beyond teal. So if anyone's familiar with Frederick Laloux's work, inviting teal organizations, Jeff has a map that um, goes several stages beyond teal in terms of what's possible for organizations. I'd call them organizations of the future. Maybe we can call them organizations of the now. What's available for later stage organizations. You can find more of Jeff's work on his website. I'll link to mine as well. Um, yeah, and I feel touched. I feel impacted having Jeff as my first guest on the show, and for this to come into being and to happen. There's been a podcast building in me for at least a decade now, so the opportunity to get to share with you in this way is a treat for me. Long time coming. So thanks for being a part of this. If you're listening, appreciate if you share with people who you sense might resonate, and let me know if you know someone who might want to be on the show. Um, yeah, be good to hear from you and hear how this is for you to receive, how it impacts you, what's happening for you in your life. I love as you know, if you know me, I love hearing from you and hearing what's going on in your world. So please reach out. Please leave a review, on the podcast and give me some feedback if that's words of encouragement or possibilities to explore for ways this show can improve. I'd be deeply grateful to hear from you on that. Would love to hear any guests you'd like to have on the future. And yeah, there's a collective emergence happening here. There's a pregnancy in the podcast I can feel of what we can collectively hold space for and birth together. Being in the field that this podcast is inviting and being with the folks who gather to share space and presence and um, contributions and invitations and practices. So um, excited to have you as a part of this journey in whatever shape that takes for you, whether it's a listener or a contributor or whatever depth on whatever spectrum that you would like to be in a relationship with this show. Just want to let you know that I love you and I care for you and I appreciate you. And I'm glad that you're here, glad that you exist. And just want to say welcome, 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 welcome. So without further ado, here is Jeff and me on my first ever podcast. Hey Jeff, welcome to my first ever podcast. It's an honor and a joy and a privilege to have you here.
Hey, Forrest, I am totally with you on that. It's really quite a joy. And hmm, the word fulfillment comes to mind, and it's only the beginning of the conversation.
Ah. Oh, I notice a big like guitar string of curiosity gets strummed in me when you say fulfillment.
Hmm.
Is there more you want to share on what's happening in fulfillment for you?
It's like sounding the note that everything else is in service to and perhaps constellates around. So, having named fulfillment as a direction, now we get to discover what it is that's being fulfilled.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, beautiful. I'm smiling from ear to ear, full body, full being smile, hearing you and getting to be with you in this way. So thank you.
Thank you.
Um, so maybe just a little context on how we know each other. If my memory serves me correctly, we met in 2019 through our good friend Dan Molly, and I know at that time my memory is that I was introduced to you in the context of sourcing, so your company sourcing the way and the practice of sourcing. And also the first time I ever met you was we were going through the map of that you put together of organizations past Frederick Laloux's teal. You had mapped out 5 or 6 stages of development organizations can go through beyond teal. So yeah, and it's been, and we could speak to both, one or both of those things, sourcing and later stage or beyond teal organizations. But for now, I just feel called to say, how grateful I am for the impact you've had on me and my consciousness, and um, just the depth of gratitude I have for our explorations together, the events we've hosted, the listenings that we've been a part of together. It's really has been and continues to be a profound joy for me. So yeah, that's how's that to hear?
Isn't it great to be friends on the journey? Yeah, and to check in from time to time. You're in Mexico, I'm in Australia, wherever we are in the world, different time zones, different energy fields, different environments of consciousness and creativity, and compare field notes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What a deep joy that is. This is.
And I'm curious, what notes are you getting from the field right now?
Well, so there's this field that we're stirring, perhaps, and this field is a continuation of a field that we've been stirring together for years, possibly before 2019. All I know is that feels like lifetimes ago, and in some ways is lifetimes ago. So, well, I can say that our last conversation merely a week ago was quite impactful in curious ways. I'll just say what's coming, even if it initially seems disconnected. So I've been working with some mold sensitivities, and I discovered in the last few months that is something that has been present. Mold, the friend that is mold, has been very present for me. And this area of Australia, Queensland, is very damp, as is the Pacific Northwest, and for some reason, a lot of places that I tend to be in. So having gotten a sense of a need to rebalance my relationship with mold, I've done various things that are natural and loving. And I've also calibrated, so this brings in sourcing, that at a certain level of embodiment, allergies cannot be, just simply cannot be. In fact, at a certain level of embodiment, sickness cannot be, disharmony cannot be. It's because disconnection cannot be. And therefore, all manner of ailments are simply impossible. So our conversation last week lifted me, that was my sense, lifted the field that we could call Jeff to a point where allergy symptoms completely disappeared and were gone, to such an extent that I realized, well, I'm not going to need to continue the mold detox. And basically since then, that's been true. So this kind of field that we're in now, not only does it feel great and nourish the heart and communicate wisdom and insights and learnings and so much more, it's lifting embodiment for those of us who are, say, consciously and intentionally present in the field. And also, the only way it works, that phrase comes to mind, is because we're lifting the field in general. It doesn't appear to be all at once, but the process of lifting is holistic and must be, or else it isn't actually lifting. It's further fragmentation, or maybe a prettier version of fragmentation. So the power of these fields is a wholeness empowerment. So you come from Mexico, I come from Australia, we meet across the ocean, and there's some at least sense of a greater whole geographically. And then there are so many subtle and esoteric levels in addition that are active.
Wow, beautiful. Wholeness empowerment. I just get this embodied sense of holding all of what is, all of what's manifest, all of what's yet manifest. And only in that can we hold a field big enough to have a truly empowering field that's supporting the natural organic evolutionary flow of consciousness, that's supporting the natural processes of healing, that's supporting natural processes of regeneration and wholeness, becoming more whole.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It reminds me of conversations we've had around levels of healers. And you once said a level 10 healer is a healer who's in the presence of a level 10 healer. We heal and awaken ourselves.
That's right. Yeah. And I'd love to be able to refer to the provenance of the framework of levels of healers, but I can't. It was mentioned in passing in a conversation years ago, and despite many attempts to Google it, I have not found who said it. It doesn't matter really. The point is there is a level of healing. Well, there's a level of healer, and I can't separate the two, at which healing just happens spontaneously. And there's a requirement for the one who's experiencing affliction, whether minor or major, to be open to the possibility of spontaneous healing. Mm-hmm. And I suppose in the presence of a level 10 healer, maybe there's a relaxation, a trust, a confidence that allows any holdbacks in one system to release. So there's probably well, definitely a science that we could explore. And in the meantime, it's something juicy to contemplate. Mm-hmm. So I would say when we gather in a field like this, there is level 10 healing that is happening. I wouldn't say you are a level 10 healer or I am a level 10 healer. We could do that, but my sense is it's much bigger than anything you can kind of draw a circle around. I can draw a circle around forest on my screen and say, like, there's forest. And in the wholeness, is that really all there is to forest? I think not.
Yeah, and as you say that, there's a sense of level 10 healings happening all the time. And as we become aware of it and consciously allow it or interface with it or be in relationship with it in some way, that there are also noticeable shifts. Yeah. So when you've said a couple of times now, a field like this or this field, I'm curious what qualities you notice in a field like this.
Well, there's openness for sure. There's clarity. Without the heart, it certainly can't be whole. And that is, present in abundance, I would say, especially with you. And curiosity as well. So there's an invitation to, let's say, to life, to the fullness, to be more fully revealed. If there's no curiosity, there's no invitation to life to show itself more. It may do so, but here there's a really strong yes to the impulse of life arising, revealing itself, and it's the aliveness, I suppose, from the deep source that is what is so healing as well. Mm-hmm. So there's a sacred, invitation, partnership with life. That's a lot of words, right? So I'm sort of speaking around the question of the qualities. There are many of them. I suppose that's the challenge with wholeness, which is ultimately the infinite. You can't really say that anything is not it.
Yeah. Well, it feels supportive to ask you about sourcing. We've mentioned it a couple times already, and maybe you can share more about what you mean when you say sourcing.
Great. Well, this is a term that I did not invent, but I want to honor my antecedents and teachers and mentors, friends friends you might not know, and Stadler, we both know. And Marilyn Overcast, who is someone who has been teaching sourcing for decades. And Anne and Marilyn were the two people who in 2010 turned me on to the possibility of being in a constant inquiry around what is yes. So what is optimal? And the language at the time was all things considered, what is optimal. So in other words, it's not just some sense of what might be good for the Jeff guy. There's that, yes, because what's optimal is actually optimal for all, for totality, for all beings. Like there can never be a trade-off between what's good for me and what's good for you. So what's optimal would be the best possible for you and the best possible for me. Now, within the world of attachments and such, it can seem, like maybe a fantasy that there could be a solution that's a solution for all, but it's a world that works for all that we're aiming for. So many of us in our work. So sourcing is a practice of, let's say, connecting with guidance, connecting with our own innate and profoundly deep wisdom. It goes all the way to the root of who and what we are, which is why we could say that it's sourcing. Sometimes I offer a distinction between sourcing and intuition. We can use our intuition more or less consciously without a sense of going all the way to the root, which is fine. But with sourcing, the intention is to go as deep as possible to the very origin of manifestation, creation, all beings, and ask and know what would be right action, let's say, in a particular moment. So I'll give you some maybe specific examples. When I first started to source systematically, and it's worth saying I already had a felt sense in my body of yes and no when something was really alive and juicy and promising. Even if I didn't necessarily know why, I would get this rising energy in my spine. And when something was off for reasons I might not understand, I would have a pressure in my left temple. And so I worked with those two signals to make practical and strategic life decisions. So when I started to do this systematically, the first time was in Seattle. I was exploring being in the Pacific Northwest, where there is so much creativity and so much innovation in terms of social transformation and, of course, environmentalism and really consciousness, because both a deep dive into the social and a deep dive into the environmental take you to the substrate, which is consciousness. So I had the opportunity to dance with many different organizations and projects, partly because I was showing up and offering my services for free. And why would I do that? Because I was interested in learning. So I had many meals and coffee meetings with people, developed friendships with mentors like Ann Stadler and many other people. It would be a long list to just learn and absorb the wisdom from generations before me, before I came on the scene. And so I had many decisions that I had to make, like, will I in fact join this board or that board, or, become a certain person on a certain team. And it was also beautiful. The left brain was unable to make the decision. I suppose, theoretically, we could create a decision matrix with 50 columns and all the possible pros and cons, which, with the number of opportunities, let's say 50, because I did have a list that was long, I think it was about 50 opportunities, would quickly become analysis paralysis. So what's 50 times 50? 2,500. That's a lot of boxes to fill in. So instead of that, I used this felt sense in my body of yes and no. And in some sense, no is the absence of yes. So this isn't, there's not really an opposition here. It's more of a spectrum of aliveness. In fact, what I noticed as I went down the list is some things were yes, and I could feel that rising energy, the tingling, the warm sensation. And some things were that like amplified. So a stronger yes signal. So I would use multiple pluses, and in that way, I had a short list of opportunities. And then I discovered, as I paid attention to what was at the top of this map, which I came to call a resonance map, life became a flow. So paying attention to what's alive, guess what? life goes to work for you, and we call that flow. You're carried by the flow of life. And of course, um, our role in that is to be awake to it, and to listen for the nudges and move with the flow, which will carry us, but will carry us better when we stay in the center of it. And so I've applied sourcing ever since, in more and more systematic ways, numerical ways, with resonance mapping. I've got now a calibration using numerical scales and other scales. You could say 0 to 10 or 0 to 100. You can use whatever scale you want. The point is, you basically hold an opportunity in your heart and then see what the response is, how strong a yes, how alive is the opportunity. There are countless ways to do this, so I won't get into the specifics unless you really want me to. But the point is that we can be in sourcing all the time, in deep listening for how life is moving, and then deliberately move with life. And we can do this for ourselves. We can do this in community. We can do this in organizations. And since you mentioned organizations earlier, organizations that are sourcing really a lot would be choral. I would say that a choral organization is radically open and available to the wisdom of life, and has in some sense transcended the idea that human minds are completely running the show. And there's more we could say about the different types of organizations past Teal, but choral keeps coming up these days, and I get that there are many organizations that are already doing this, maybe without knowing, where you have individuals who work according to inspiration, and allow themselves to be guided and to act on that guidance. And then we have organizations that are life, because if you're listening to life and acting on the messages of life in service to life, you are life. So an organization is life. And then we go beyond choral, we get into clear light, we get into what I would call true nature, like an organization that is nature. And beyond, to a radically enlightened world where the organization is so awake that the world can't help but reflect radical awakeness back.
Hear, hear. Yeah. I'll put the model, your model of these later stage organizations on the podcast page for folks to look at, so you have an image to reference the map that Jeff made that we're referencing. And Jeff, I imagine this is implicit already, but just to make it explicit, I want to invite us both in our exploration together to follow our aliveness, to follow our sourciness, and to be embodied examples of this practice together here now. So just make that an explicit invitation. Yeah. And I want just to name how much this has impacted, the experience of Forrest. Stefan Segatori. He's my business partner. Yeah, deep bow to Stefan for sure. He's my business partner for Light in Action, and Stefan and I, as co-founders and also our core organizing team, we are holding space and convening and facilitating and practicing sourcing as a moment by moment way of bringing what we are called to be a part of and create into being. So this is the organization of the future and the practice of sourcing are palpably alive in our experience.
Well, and there are big tingles in my spine and head all the way up to the crown as you share that. So that would be a very strong confirmation of the rightness of Light in Action and how you are working together as a team, and especially as as an awakened and awakening, because there's always more awakening available, collective, as a real model of how we can work together, heal together, and heal the world together.
Well, and you said it's in the name. I mean, when we open up to and awaken into the clear light that we are, and allow that light to act through us and as us, we are Light in Action. So I enjoyed hearing your explanation. And so the one thing that could be fun is to flesh out the journey of how sourcing, you mentioned there's a lot of levels and nuances. I'm sure we could get into what we notice in terms of tips and tricks and tools and subtleties and ways that we play with sourcing. But even more than that, I get curious, what is the most robust, juicy, vivacious experience of your sourcing practice, these days, like in this moment?
Well, it's really continuous. And I gave you only a partial answer to what is sourcing, and even that took maybe 10 minutes. So I think of sourcing as, and have sourced, in fact, that sourcing has two stages. Stages gets used in a lot of different ways. Two modes, maybe. I want to say modes. And so the first mode is connecting to the source of guidance, receiving the guidance, and putting it into action. Mm-hmm. So there's some sense in this mode of being downstream of the source. Mm-hmm. And we ask, and then down floats the answer, and then we put it to good use in our lives. That's great. That's awesome. Like that alone pretty much would, quote, save the world if we're doing this enough, and enough of us are doing this. The second mode is actually being source. Mm-hmm. So like the more we source, the more we're actually moving upstream, you could say. Mm-hmm. And when we're sourcing continuously, we are source, just like I was saying before about life. When we're really listening to life and putting life into action and aligning with its currents and being in service to it all the time, we are life. We've never not been life, but now we're life realized as life. So we can also be source realized as source. And then sourcing becomes about creativity, creative expression. There may or may not be questions to answer, but sourcing is let's say, the awakened activity of source, of God, of the divine, of the supreme. I like the language, the supreme, because it sort of steps around ideas we might have of God and divinity, and even source, which has been used for a while now in a lot of different ways. So like be the supreme is the invitation here. And sourcing is a practice to consciously, and even beyond consciousness, realize and abide as the supreme, as that, which is the origin of the world. And so sourcing in its juiciest and most, I don't know if you said vivacious, something close to that, expression now is really about creating and recreating existence on this planet. But you can't do it only on this planet. If you're recreating as source, you're recreating everything all at once. And so there is the phrase from I think maybe even the Old Testament, and also more recently in Paul Selig's work, behold, I make all things new. So I create all things anew. And that's what we're doing. It's what we're remembering how to do. And the way that I show up now in the world and in organizational contexts and such relates to a theory of change, which is more about recreation than it is about fixing problems. Mm-hmm. Although we have to acknowledge what hasn't worked, because that's feedback into the creative process. Mm-hmm. And we have to acknowledge what has worked. We don't have to, but it's highly recommended.
Yeah. It's part of the sourcing process, to have the clarity on information. What's the difference between the stories that we hold about what's happening versus the actual reality, raw data, pure experience versus the how we sort of skate on top of that in the ways that we do.
Yeah, I really honor all of the forms of feedback. Experiential feedback, ideas that drop in, human interactions. Everything anyone has ever said is actually a form of sourcing. So really everything is sourcing. Mm-hmm. And there's a spectrum of to what extent is it realized that there is nutritional value in what's being shared and received.
Yeah, it's nothing is not source, and source, capital S, is more sourcey than that which is birthed from and falls back into source.
Yeah.
And I remember the last call we had about a week ago, I actually said, "Hey, can I offer you a reflection?" I really my experience of you is shifting from downstream receiving source and sharing it into a move back. I'm not sure that's the move I was pointing to. It might be another move towards some object that is the origin of that which all experience manifests from. But I've just had a palpable experiential shift in, like, we personally, I claim to at least experience where people are coming from quite a bit, and so it seems that there's been an even deeper settling or an even deeper dissolving back into and being able to orient from the supreme.
That's true. This is the journey. I don't want to say that it has to look any one way, but generally speaking, the journey of settling back into what is always and already the case, and the the diversity of the ways in which this can happen is part of what makes life and collective human experience so amazing. I find myself these days really talking about the genius of the human, and the fact that we can operate in multiple modes simultaneously, and the joy of discovery that is possible through the human form and the many levels of what there is to discover. So, gosh, I would never want to be too prescriptive about what it looks like. But that word settling, again, really resonates. It reminds me of the verse in the Tao Te Ching, which says something like, can you be still enough to become clear, like the clear water? And I think the word settling may even be used. Wouldn't it be great if I remembered it verbatim? But I don't. Because that's the idea. If we just can still ourselves, still our minds, and become super clear, then there's an obviousness. Everything is visible that needs to be seen. And what needs to be done is also very apparent. So I'm curious to see what happens in systems, let's say organizational systems, where obviousness is a defining feature. You just know what to do. What happens with strategy and strategic planning when there is obviousness, right? Like things can happen a lot faster, and there's an acceleration that occurs naturally. And it's a natural acceleration because it really is, again, empowered by life. So thank you for your reflection, by the way. I get a yes to your capacity, maybe your aesthetic ability to know where it is that people are coming from, to feel it and know it from within yourself.
Citic ability.
Yeah. Siddhi, the word from, I think, Hindi and Sanskrit that refers to one's special ability, let's say a divine capacity, and like a next level genius. And when I say divine here, I could say human as well, because what's happening is the dissolution. You talk about dissolution of the distinction between divine and human, which I get is at the root of so much dysfunction. So to say siddhic can seem like it puts it out of reach. No. I want to say it's very much in reach. And so you may be an early flowering of this ability to know empathically or in some other manner where the quote other person is coming from. And the number of such abilities is unlimited, and we all have access to all of them. So again, the genius of the human, if we become curious enough and open ourselves and invite the deep gifts to become expressed. Wow. I mean, can you imagine a human civilization where the currency isn't necessarily like how much money do you have? Money, we love money. That's another conversation, because it is life. Actually, we love everything about life, including money. So we're healing that piece that's been held away from sacredness and created a lot of kind of putrefaction in the collective consciousness. So anyway, imagine a civilization where, like, I can celebrate your gifts and you celebrate my gifts, and they don't have to be the same, and we're not in competition because there's this infinite array of possible gifts to express. And also when you know the oneness to whatever extent, you realize, hey, forest is another me, another myself in Lakesh. And there's nothing that I don't, quote, have. And really there's this joyful mirroring process that is collective human existence. Keep coming back to that. Seems like it's a theme today.
And in fields like this, to use the way you described it earlier, it seems those capacities instantiate, illuminate, start to flesh out, and become more stable in us just being in these, I want to say, clear light fields.
That's true. In fact, one of the early intentions of say this work, the work that I've been engaged in for a while now, definitely a decade plus. It took a few years to like catch on to what's really happening here, and that process continues. What's really happening here? I want to leave that as an open question rather than answer it too fully. But part of what's happening here is, yes, the activation that occurs. So even going back about 10 years, I remember even writing down on numerous occasions that one of the things that this work does is awaken people's spiritual gifts and abilities, divine capacities, whatever the language was at the time. And I delight in that. And I've seen it happen many times in different contexts where, for instance, at a consciousness of money retreat, more than one person reported, starting to see auras. Or in another case, a close colleague of mine actually started to source in his own way, where suddenly his hand just started to kind of make certain maybe gestures, or his thumb would place itself in a certain way relative to the other fingers, and that would indicate the degree of yes, the degree of truth. And he started to use that in all of his business decisions, and what has resulted is quite a luminous enterprise for that and other reasons. But when you bring the sourcing in, the enterprise goes from being maybe perfectly wonderful to actually being inspired and definitely a next level of impact potential.
And I'm imagining, I mean, I know on my side over here, there's a process of, if something's 78% resonant in in a test. I'm using my hand now. This would be a new way to do it for me. But in my own way, if there's those slight hesitations, or if it's not 100%, for me, there's a moment of, okay, there's more information available in this moment, or potentially there's a different question. That's another dance move. There's a different question that wants to be asked, more information that wants to come into the moment. There could be a shadow or a trauma that's having some kind of constriction in it. That's less so the case these days. Or like some kind of dissolution that's happening to make room for more clarity. So those are a few of the different buckets that I find of possibilities for when something's not 100% or greater. It doesn't stop at 100%, but I'm curious, how that is to hear. And I imagine I just make up that you have an infinite number of ways to do this, but.
Well, that's true. It is infinite because everything is infinite. In fact, infinitization is one of the key points that's been coming up over and over again. If I had a set of teachings, one of them for sure would be infinitization, which is coming to realize that nothing is actually finite. I realize in the world there are experiences of limits and a finite number of things and bank accounts and so on. But if we really look at all that's possible for that to be experienced, the infinity is required, and nothing can be separate from the infinity. So as we shift to the infinite perspective, then even what appeared previously to be finite no longer even feels finite. And so our relationship with money changes. We realize we're in a flow that is an infinite flow, and the infinite flow will always provide for our needs if we're receptive to it and awake enough to be listening for the encouragement. Because you could say money is always saying, hey, over here, this would be really great. This would be great for humanity. If you do this for humanity, humanity will compensate you. So right livelihood, presents itself in the flow of the infinite. But there's one more question or inquiry I could add to your list, which is whether it might be beneficial to look at this from another perspective. That's often been the case. If I get a more information scenario, it could be, well, lift your view a bit. look at this differently from another level. And so there's an art as well as a science. If you write down the questions and you go through them systematically, that's a science. The art is also knowing, just kind of intuitively, which domain of inquiry would best serve in the moment. For me, if it's not 100, if we make it strictly 100-point scale, even recognizing that 100 is infinite, but somehow it's the upper bound. The commitment here is, if it's less than 100, it's not a yes. Like that, there's an infinite gulf between 100 and anything less than like 99.9999999 36 million nines, still infinitely less than 100. Infinitely yes than yes.
Yeah.
So then we discover that that's like the extreme version of life as a flow. But we can also set our threshold anywhere we want. We can say the threshold is 80. Anything over an 80 is a yes. And then we live according to a form of flow that has a bit more turbulence, a bit more, gosh, I don't want to say anything that sounds negative. It's another experiment that we can run. Yeah. The experiment that I'm running is 100 or bust.
I'm with you in that. It's I don't know, it's like threading a needle or sitting right on the tip of the sword. The thing I love it is the second it comes off of it at all, you immediately know, because 100 reverberates so palpably different than 99.996 million times. There's such a palpably different reverberation in the 100.
So we can invite whoever might be listening to let these words sink in, let these insights go deeply into wherever they need to go, whether it's the heart or the mind or the body, mind, spirit system. Yeah, because this field that we're referring to includes everyone who will enter it in any way whatsoever.
Yeah, nothing not in this field.
And those who maybe don't consciously ever step into it. Well, I really want to honor again that you're initiating this journey of the podcast, and it comes to me is to welcome you into a new aspect of your work.
I feel really blessed doing that.
And I really see you as an exemplary model of one who, well, first of all, one who then is in service to the collective aspect of the one. And who is willing to explore almost like the pendulum of the one, the many, the one, the many, and integrate the levels of wholeness that are, frankly, and not everyone is constituted or perhaps has the fortitude to go into all of the different levels and explore and bring back the wisdom and the beauty to share. So I feel that you are someone who ventures fearlessly into the many domains and with a heart and a real commitment to serve.
Okay, I'm gonna give myself a minute, a moment to just really receive that. That's really, really sweet to receive. Thank you. Yeah, I'm just dropping even deeper into receptivity and letting myself be impacted. I want to do a gesture of bringing my arms out and welcoming in everything you just said 100%, and also in that reciprocating and sharing it back to you 100%. And I'm in tremendous company for this kind of appreciation. So thank you.
You're welcome.
There's a curiosity in me. You mentioned earlier being downstream from source, and then there's, as we do that, we just almost circumstantially or as a byproduct start to move closer and closer to source, until we are at the well, or at the source of source. There's I'd call it a pinhole, or a point right there at which source is birthing all of what is manifest and yet manifest, that actually it's possible to go through and be somewhat on the other side. I'm curious if that resonates for you at all.
Well, definitely. I've created many maps, and generally I would come to a point where there was a sense of beyond source. Mm-hmm. And to some extent, it depends on our definition. What is it that we mean by source? Which is why I've shifted to saying the supreme. If there's any sense of source and that which kind of spews forth from source, somehow there's more than that. And abiding as source, to me, has the feeling of not at the point at which all kind of projects forth, but prior to that point. And so in some sense, the whole of manifestation is just like an infinitesimal dot, like the source point, which is infinitesimal somehow, meaning it's as small as it gets. Like you can't even say how small it is. Contains everything, and perhaps everything that's possible in potential. The potential has more the feeling of what's behind that point to me. So when Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, again, I can only paraphrase, I support the entirety of manifestation with but a fragment of my being. My sense is that's what he's saying. He's saying, everything you can possibly see and dance within, all of the stars, are about a fragment, and the smallest possible fragment of my being at that. So be Krishna, like read the Bhagavad Gita as Krishna, not as Arjuna, but as Krishna, and you start to get a sense of what it's like to be on the other side of the origin point.
I love that you call it the origin point. That's perfect. Yeah, I don't know how much language I'll have here, but as the word unfathomable is what comes to me. Just getting on the other side of that origin point there, unfathomable light.
Well, having named it, here it is.
Having named it, here it is. I hear the words rest in this, and it feels like an invitation for anyone with us right now. Rest in this. And an invitation to be resourced by this as the.
And it's always here. We're always here, and we can be engaged in any activity right from here as this. And that just happens to be way more empowered as well. So thinking about organizational systems, humanity, in some sense, we can just say, let's not worry about humanity. Let's not worry at all about organizations. Let's just be here and see what happens. And then what tends to happen is organizations happen, humanity happens, like life still happens. Only it happens in a way that works for all, in fact. So So it really is the both and, the all and, but let's just be resourced from and as the source.
You're speaking to the clarity that's come into me around there's a list of purposes, maybe it's not the right word, but intentions or purposes get sort of into the range of the clarity that's come through for what this podcast is inviting, and the clarity actually of it being the most important priority in the forest characters working life right now, and that being to experientially emanate this in a way that more and more of us can have access and be resourced and rest into this and allow it to inform things like podcasts that we're launching.
Right. And the word fulfillment comes in. Bingo. This is the fulfillment.
The concrete body being here starts to sweat a little bit, and there's a warming that happens. It's the light is detoxing and purifying and moving through the concrete body in a way that every time there's quite a experiential sense of cleaning and upgrading and harmonizing and recalibrating, uploading new information into. I just wanted to name that as an experiential part of sourcing. I get curious if that's been part of your journey or is in this practice.
Well, a specific example goes back to our call last week. Once again, afterwards, when I stepped out of the room, I realized the room was substantially warmer than the rest of the house, more so than when I had gone to get coffee before our conversation. And you could perhaps find some explanation related to the sun, although the sun wasn't really shining on that part of the house where I was yet. That comes later in the day. And what came to me was, yes, in fact, as we were sourcing, we were bringing a lot of energy, a lot of light, and information. And energy, information, and light, we can't really pick them apart. So they're all kind of together, along with vibration. And it had the effect of heating up the room. And then that reminded me of yogis who would go into caves in the high mountains, and they'd have to practice something called tumo, I believe. And if I'm mispronouncing it, apologies to the Tibetans amongst us. But basically, if you're in a cave high in the Himalayas and it's really darn cold, we need practices to heat up the space that we're in for the concrete body to be maintained. And so there is a way actually of intentionally bringing heat into the surrounding space. We may have done that inadvertently. It may be that you're doing it when your body starts to sweat. It's just happening naturally. And that's a siddhi that could be practiced. It probably isn't necessary for everyone to develop it. Not everyone lives in really cold places and practices meditation in remote caves, but nevertheless, it's happening anyway. Again, an illustration of how we've all got it and we've all got all of it. What do we want to develop of it? What do we want to play with and become skilled in?
In this moment, I'm just closing my eyes for a moment, and the experience happening over here is the cities, the divine gifts, the lights illuminating in beings in the field, potentially listening to this podcast, potentially just being in the field, just the witnessing of the illumination of that which is most essential in us coming online and beginning to flourish.
Yes. And the power of deliberately saying yes to what is possible and what's ripe and available. So I would invite anyone who's with us asynchronously to say yes to what is your gift, your gifts, what are your gifts, because they are myriad, and open to their expression now. And it might be that the expression initially is very subtle, very slight, and 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 easy to dismiss. So my suggestion is don't dismiss it. If you start to have a sense of seeing auras, for example, it's not necessary for everyone to see auras. It might not be. It might be extremely useful in certain instances and not in others. But just as a specific example, if you start to notice an outline, a kind of luminous, maybe even colorful extension of a body that you're looking at, don't write it off. Be grateful. Say yes to more of this capacity. And my prediction is indeed you will receive more of the capacity. In my case, there was this signal, and it started in 2002. And this was before I really had a lot of consciousness, let's say. So it took a few years for me to appreciate that this was a gift. And then as I started to be open and talk about it even. So the talking about it, sharing with the world. I wrote a blog post called The Signal about this sense of yes that I could feel in my spine. It took 5 years before I wrote the blog post. But once I actually was willing to say it publicly and basically irretractably, somehow that completed the circuit. And then the capacity became continuously available. At least that's how the story goes. And that's how I remember it. So I would say not only say yes and pay attention to the subtle signals and appreciate and not discount, but maybe even share with your friends and family that you have some gifts, because we're giving one another permission to have gifts, to be more than maybe the consensus definition of what a human is. This brings us back to dissolving the distinction between human and divine. The more we can be divine, the more we can be truly ourselves. And artificial intelligence, now bringing in something from a totally seemingly other realm, is a great stimulus for us to be more of ourselves, because it has been pretty common to define humans in terms of some sense of intelligence, some actually fairly limited idea of what intelligence is. And along come computers that are powerful enough to do a lot of what humans do way faster, way better. Not yet in all cases, but it's just a matter of time, and not very much time before the the IQ on a Stanford Binet test of a machine would be thousands, millions, billions. So then what is a human? Okay, well, let's look at what else we are. And we have these gifts that probably can't be coded. So let's start exploring them. Now is a really good time. And by the way, we'll get a lot more intelligence in the process too. Sourcing accesses infinite intelligence. So it's not even useful to have an IQ test if you're sourcing. We can let go of a lot of really kind of colonial structures that have marginalized people in segmented societies and cultures. Be really good in terms of the collective healing to let that go. So thank you, artificial intelligence, for the nudge.
The nudge. Yeah. Yeah, it's I feel care for a former forest, and also for anyone watching, of if these gifts are coming online, and we're here. Jeff and I are here. You can reach out to us if you need any support. I'm having memories of when some faculties or capacities opened up in me. I went out in the jungle in northern Thailand, and reality just completely broke down for me. I mean, I was interacting with animal spirits that were just walking right next to me through the jungle, and the universe would fall into and out of form, out of a luminous void in real time. I could see the code of reality kind of moving through space and time, and all kinds of things opening up. And then sort of freaked out and started to head back towards the US. On the way, I stopped for London for a few days, and ended up on the tube in London, and could hear the inner worlds of everybody else on the tube that I was, sitting next to. And I'm just so grateful that I didn't personally end up in a mental institution or go completely crazy in that experience, because it was, for me, quite unbounded, and I had no stability in that experience. It just felt like a madhouse. So I'm also feeling care as we're in a field like this, and transmitting it for anyone listening. If there are things opening up and activating and enlivening in you, we're here, and just holding you in a field of love and care, with
Yes.
transmission of fundamental okayness. Everything is okay.
Yes. Yeah, there will be is a lot of spiritual emergence happening, and the conditions of the world, challenging as they are fertile conditions for the emergence of more of who we are. So sometimes adversity has its place. Maybe it always has its place, because everything does. So we can honor the difficulty of the world as a kind of initiation and a transitional period to really a promised land. And it's promised because we can't avoid who and what we are forever. And as we focus on source, coming back to the downstream upstream metaphor, there's like this tractor beam. You're looking at it, it's looking at you, and you can't kind of help but like get closer together, because it's what you are, we are. And it's a heck of a journey. I would say after my initial activation in 2002, it was years of tumult and breakdown, actually. And I didn't have any context, any spiritual or consciousness context, to see that it was okay, fundamentally okay. It wasn't fun. It was fundamentally okay. And it could have been a lot more fun if I had a sense of the beautiful field that I was moving into, and I would have moved through uh, the transitional period much faster if I had known. So if we can be here for one another, which means talking about it, talking about our gifts, sharing how we're really feeling and how we're really doing,
Mm-hmm.
it will really help on every level. So it's the work of our times. And again, I see you really as an exemplary um, embodiment for the work. And I'm just so delighted to be part of the inaugural conversation. I look forward to there being many more that I can witness and perhaps join you for in right timing.
Hearing that, I noticed a curiosity in me on how you're doing on time. I know we booked another hour, but hearing that, I had a little bit of oh, does Jeff need to transition?
Well, following the energy has brought us to a potential point of conclusion, um, not precipitated by any scheduling requirement, however.
Beautiful. Yeah, well, I'd love for folks to know that there's also our Light in Action has a community and a field. We call it the Twinkle Field because of the reverberation, the aliveness and the reverberation, um, that's so palpably potent in the field that we gather in. That it's a place people that we come to rest and to receive. We invite the consciousness of money to join for every call, so people can speak directly to and listen for and from money. But it's I'm just feeling care for naming support possibilities and infrastructure that's in place available for folks who are in a process of big opening, or who just want some friends in the in what's, in what's unfolding, and being available, standing as embodied examples of this emerging economy, of this emerging new world and what's coming online. It helps to have to cohere with other beacons of light, and to be in a field that's robust and resourced and nourishing. Because it really is like a form of nourishment, or a nutrient. There's a nutrient density there of this is what feeds. Uh, this is what feeds now on the deepest level. It always has. um, and I get curious what I know you always have offers and things that are available, but I'm curious, is there anything you'd want folks listening to know about in terms of ways they can engage with you and be in a relationship with you beyond listening to the recording we have here today?
Good question. Thanks. Well, in some ways, I have less to say than usual because I've been in semi-seclusion working on 3 books. And so one way to engage is through the writing, which is on my website, jeffvanderclute.com. You'll find there's a books tab, and under books, we have Beyond Every Teaching, The Ladder of Awakening, and Root Meanings, which are a lot of fun, at least I think so, as well as being fundamental. So those are all instances of transmission, and probably would be enjoyable, on certain levels to read, but I think for the heart and mind, not just the mind. And then I love having conversations that are transformational in nature, that are awakening in actuality. So through my website, you're welcome to schedule a session. And I'm really flexible about what constitutes a session. If you feel called to connect, just do so. Trust that knowing, and good things ensue.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I've gotten some. I feel so appreciated by you in this call. Is it okay if I share some appreciation with you?
Sure.
Okay, beautiful. Well, Jeff, I just want to thank you from, the bottom of my heart and the base of my being, for the impact that you've had on me, and for being the inaugural guest on this podcast. It's just being here with you now. It's evident um, not only the gift of your presence in my life, but also what a fitting start to whatever this podcast is going to become. I'm really touched by what's unfolded here with us and as us and through us today. And I can't think of a single time where we've gotten to hang out that it hasn't been just absolutely sensational and incredibly fulfilling, to use our words. So just want to give a deep bow of appreciation to you for the continued gift that you are in my life. And um, um, yeah, just feeling a tremendous amount of love and care for you right now. Very, very grateful for you.
Well, thank you. I'll receive in the way that you demonstrated. 100%. Oh, my love to you, brother. Yeah, deep bow, great respect, and great love.
Feels like a good place to pause for now.